Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Lackawanna Past Times. I'm Sarah Puccini, the Assistant Director at the Lackawanna Historical Society. Today we have a special program about the history of St. Joseph's Center in Scranton, and we're joined by Sister Maryalice Jacquinot. Sister Maryalice is a member of the Congregation of the Sisters Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary in Scranton. She received a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts from Marywood University, as well as a Master of Science from Newman University in Aston, PA. Sister Maryalice has served in various roles at Marywood University, Marion Community Hospital, and Max's Health Systems in Carbondale, and succeeded Sister Adrienne Barrett as president of Friends of the Poor in 2009. In July of 2010, she was appointed to serve as the president and CEO of St. Joseph's Center in Scranton. St. Joseph itself was founded in 1888 and established by Bishop O'Hara as St. Joseph's foundling home. So I understand a lot has changed in the last 130 some years at St. Joe's, and we do continue a mission to serve the community. So Sister Maryalice, I'll turn the program over to you. If you could tell us more about the history of St. Joseph Center.
I will. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. One of my favorite things to do is to talk about the good works of St. Joseph Center in all kinds of setting. I don't think I've done a presentation in this format on Zoom, so I am really looking forward to it. I did prepare a PowerPoint, if I can share that.
Sure.
Everyone see that?
Yes.
I thought that might be helpful to have some visuals, and I will allow time. I think your format is to ask those questions at the end. What I find to be true whenever I do talk locally about St. Joe's, there's usually someone who has also a life experience deeply connected to St. Joe's. So I'm happy to hear from anyone about their personal experience if you have one. And that has helped to inform my experience and my knowledge about the history of St. Joe's. I think it is important. This says St. Joseph Center, founded in 1888. I will get into it a little bit, but the name change has occurred. There have been several name changes throughout the 137 years, and I'll explain a little bit. It also reflects the different phases of the growth of St. Joe's. It's also important to remember the history of St. Joe's, like so many organizations. It's also impacted by everything that was going on around it. So how we care for people with disabilities today is different than how we did in 1950, or the terminology that we might use. So we've also been influenced by the history of the church, the local community of Lackawanna County, by the medical community, and the education and social service community as well. And then also to just mention that the history of St. Joe's is very closely intertwined with the history of the congregation of the Sister Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the Sisters of IHM, as we're very well known. So the beginning, and in 2013, we celebrated our 125th anniversary, and we did develop a booklet that we distributed at that time, and it was broken into chapters, and I sort of like the symbolic titles that were given to each. So the first one is called Humble Beginnings, and a lot of the history of St. Joe's starts with that phrase, St. Joe's humbly began. So on November 20th, 1888, the president, or the Mother Superior of the congregation, invited women who were members of the Catholic Aid Society to come together to learn about, to problem solve concerning what was reported that children were being abandoned because their parents couldn't care for them. Maybe a single mother, maybe parents. We have to think, all of you would be familiar. When I'm talking sometimes to maybe a group of new employees and everyone in the room is between 20 and 30, they may not have a sense of the history of the local community. I don't have to get into that. So there was a time, obviously, where there was much more commerce in the downtown. Some of the ways that people earned their income might end in injury or death, such as coal mining, railroading, and also the family structures were much more traditional, mother, father at home. Also in the 1880s, maybe there wasn't second, like a grandparent generation to help care for children or other extended family. And very few social services, such as after-school programs, subsidized housing, school lunch programs, so many things that we have today that made families really experience poverty in a very profound way. So the Mother Superior, M. Frances Henry, she invited volunteers to come to a meeting, and 8 women came, and they formed the St. Joseph Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children and Aged Persons. They met in the building that's now part of the cathedral in that area. And so they decided that very evening that they would begin to care for children in their own homes as volunteers. The word of that continued to spread so much that they began to acquire small homes. From our history, I'm told that the homes were, I could read that the homes were on Jackson Street and then also in other areas in the hill section. These were referred to as foundling homes, and they did require funding. So the first 2 years was volunteer work, and then, of course, it did require uh, um, funding and full-time staffing. So at this time, the formal relationship with the congregation, which we know as sponsorship, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of my presentation. The formal relationship with the congregation was created. And at that time, a congregation of women religious could not make their own decision to sponsor a ministry. And so, as Sarah read, it was founded by the bishop. It was founded by the sisters with the bishop's approval. And I have said that in front of Bishop Bambera many times. The history says, and the bishop permitted the sisters to do this work. So that also reflects a time, a different time for us indeed. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about Mother Mary Frances Henry, and this is another example of how her story is really tied, the IHM story is really tied to the history of St. Joseph Center. So Mother Mary Frances Henry came to the United States from Ireland in 1835. This was a time when the United States as a new country was receiving religious men and women, priests and sisters from Europe. They would come here as missionaries. So she came here to be a missionary to help develop the church, including in Pennsylvania. She lived in New Jersey, but she ultimately entered the IHM congregation in Reading, Pennsylvania. There are 3 branches of IHM. Today it is Scranton, Immaculata, Pennsylvania, and Monroe, Michigan. At one point, this whole eastern part of Pennsylvania was the Diocese of Philadelphia. And so we were one IHM congregation in Pennsylvania. When the Diocese of Scranton was formed, there was a split, and Mother Mary Frances Henry came into the now Scranton branch of the IHM Sisters. She was the Mother Superior. She would have been appointed. Today we have elections. She was appointed in 1877, and at that time she was going to serve for 12 years. So her term would have finished in 1889, and she was the leader. She was considered the administrative chairperson, and she's the one who invited women to come to the meeting on November 20th. So I think it's important to give credit. She is buried on the campus of Marywood University. She died in 1912, and I always appreciate that because I think she not only saw the founding, but she saw almost 25 years of the ministry in its development. So with the need growing, several small houses being staffed by sisters, the diocese decided to conduct a collection to raise funds for a larger residence. And do have the details. So to complete the facility that was opened at 2010 Adams Avenue, it cost $38,000. So this piece of land that we're on is 2.5 acres, and it was sold to us for $1 from the Pennsylvania Coal Company. In fact, we do have some permits that still say Lackawanna Coal Company. And the letter says that the agreement was a consideration of $1 on condition that the land shall revert to this company, which is no longer in business, if it shall cease to be used by the said society for a foundling home. So we're grateful to have this small piece of land. It is ironically on the border of both Scranton and Dunmore. So the front of our building is Scranton, and the back portion of our building is Dunmore. So we're right here in the middle. And just a little aside, I think sometimes about why this land was available but from the coal company. There's a story that is part of the IHM legacy, and on Marywood's campus there is the Our Lady of Victory shrine. And I've always been told that there was a proposal that a railroad might come through the campus and split the campus. And with the sisters' prayers and persuasion, that never happened. And so maybe the coal company no longer needed this piece of land in conjunction with the railroad. I don't know if that's true. But this main center here in the upper right corner opened in 1900. The center portion was finished in 1900 with the 2 wings being added in 1908. And if you're familiar with the building, it has very distinct architecture. It has it's yellow brick with a terracotta roof, and it's really it stands out, I think. I appreciate being able to see it from places north and west of here. Not as much in the summer, but certainly when the leaves fall, it kind of stands out. Even from 81, you can observe it. So when it first opened, it was home for children whose parents couldn't care for them, whether that would be that they were placed for adoption or if just on a temporary basis, maybe their parents were unable to care for them. And I did meet someone, in fact, who lived here for a short period of time. When I first came here, she asked to come in and see the facility. She remembered living here. Her mother was hospitalized for what we would probably think today is a simple surgery. She was in the hospital for 3 months. Her father worked out of town, and so she and her siblings lived here for that time. They were reunited as a family. She had fond memories of being here, although she certainly did miss being with her family. So this campaign to raise funds to build the facility, it was actually a door-to-door campaign that raised the $38,000 for us to live here. Another thing of note is that this little section of Adams Avenue, according to the Images of America, the Greenridge edition put out by Margot Azzarelli, refers to this as Charity Hill. So next to us on the corner, continuing today, is the campus that was known as the Scranton State School for the Deaf, now under renovation. On property that we've now built our therapy building was once the forerunner of the Friendship House, known as Home for the Friendless. And then, of course, Marywood College, Mount St. Mary's Seminary, Marywood Seminary, now Marywood University, was the first Catholic college for women in the state of Pennsylvania, intending to educate the daughters of coal miners. And then Little Sisters of the Poor had Maloney Home, and now Little Holy Family Residence, and today it is Marywood Heights. So in this little section, there were 5 charitable organizations meeting needs of the time. 2 name changes occurred in 1919. The name was changed to St. Joseph's Children's and Maternity Hospital. That remains the name over our front door. And then in 1927, we were incorporated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And this is a little framed certificate of our incorporation. This photo in the upper left just always strikes me as kind of showing who's gathered around St. Joseph, the statue, but really the mission of St. Joseph's. Of course, we have this mix of the sisters and the staff, and the ladies with the pocketbooks, I think, are the fundraisers, and of course, the children. This would have been a little later on, post 1950, because the children pictured here are in wheelchairs, showing that they're children with disabilities. This is one of our classic photos. This shows all of the children and the sisters and the staff on the front, out front of this. This says St. Joseph's Foundling Home, but it does, in fact, at some point it was changed to Children's and Maternity Hospital. So for the most part, the facility has remained the same on the outside. There's been an addition, and we've renovated inside many times over. But I just love to see some of the joy in the face of the children, even though, you know, they were living in an orphanage separate from their family. Looks like pure chaos. So I could relate to that on certain days at St. Joe's today. The next chapter in this history book we put out was called Struggling On. So in particular, it talks about the years 1915 to 1950 as being years of great challenge, although also years of growth for St. Joseph Center. Some of those challenges coming from, or St. Joseph's, I should say, some of those challenges really coming from the world wars, disease, Great Depression, challenges to care for children, to provide, even from the documents that I've read, even to provide food for the children who were here. Sometimes the children were here temporarily, and sometimes they were here in order to be cared for or placed for adoption. I want to mention that we did have a school of nursing with a specialization in pediatric nursing. There was a time that it awarded the RN license, but there were other times that it provided the pediatric rotation, the pediatric experience. And in the lower right corner, in fact, is the certificate earned by Michael Martin's mother and my grandmother, Mary Valverde Grippi. She earned her nursing degree from St. Mary Keller Hospital, but her pediatric rotation was here at St. Joseph's Children's and Maternity Hospital. St. Joseph's became a licensed child placement agency in 1939, although the work of placing children for adoption preceded that. And I think it's worth just considering the perseverance of those who are really dedicated to this mission during these very challenging times to ensure that the needs of the children were met and that there would be a continuation of the service. The next phase is called Changing Needs. And on March 31st, 1950, 3 children with intellectual disabilities were admitted. This is in response to the state of Pennsylvania looking for residential care for children born with disabilities. So we can only imagine that in 1950, more children are born in the hospital, more children are surviving childbirth if noted with a disability, and there still is an uncertainty in the medical community, education community, social services. How will these children grow and develop to be placed in a specialized care center so that their parents could focus on other children and the needs of the children would be met? That first group of children probably wouldn't live here today. They were children born with Down syndrome, who we know today live at home, go to school, get jobs, have their own apartments. They don't need specialized residential care. Who we care for today are persons born with intellectual and developmental disabilities and those who are medically complex across the lifetime. So this upper right corner is Mother Maria Delora. She would have been my predecessor in the 1950s. And she's holding 1-year-old Paula. Paula actually lived here for 51 years. She lived to be 52, so she came as a 1-year-old. And I knew Paula. She only passed in about 2011. So she was a wonderful woman who had a lot of fun and characteristics that made her memorable to a lot of people. And I just always remember her. She unfortunately was the first person who died when I was the administrator, and I spoke with her sister. And when I asked her about, I told her about our sympathies, and she said, Paula lived a longer life than my parents expected because she knew she was loved. And it just always touched me that we focus in the workplace very often on the care that needs to be provided, but we know all people flourish when they have a sense of belonging and being loved. So that was definitely true for Paula. Important legislation occurred in the 1960s that would certainly come to change St. Joseph Center. Very important things. In 1963, President Kennedy, as part of the New Frontier Initiative, signed the Community Mental Health Act, also known as Mental Health, Mental Retardation Act. In 1966, similar legislation was signed for Pennsylvania. And with that legislation came additional funding, challenges to the states to create alternatives to large congregate living for persons with intellectual disabilities who didn't necessarily need all of the supports provided in large congregate living. And so new services developed, and St. Joe's responded to those new opportunities, which certainly has broadened our scope and who we serve and how we serve today. So the next era, if you will, of St. Joe's is instead called breaking down the walls, not in a destructive way, but really bringing the mission of St. Joseph Center out into the community wherever people may be to receive the services that they might want. And so we could look to some milestones that have occurred. The summer festival, yes, it continues today as a large festival, as a large fundraiser for us. But what was important about the creation of the summer festival in 1961, it was the neighborhood, families in the neighborhood, in particular the mothers, who wanted their children to know the children who lived at St. Joseph's. And so, in fact, one of our neighbors, Gert Sheridan, only passed away a few years ago. She was one of the founders of creating this backyard picnic. And today we still call our summer festival the area's biggest backyard picnic because it still has that same sense of neighborhood and friendship and building community. But that has continued as a fundraiser for us since 1961, changing over the years to a chicken dinner, changing location now to Marywood University. In 1977, St. Joseph Center began to build and acquire community homes. This is a home that we have on Oak Street in Taylor. St. Joseph's has 15 homes where individuals live in groups of 1 up to 6. Depending on the license for the home, it may be staffed with LPNs, but it also is they're all staffed 24 hours a day for the care of people. And the idea of community living is that it's more typical of the neighborhood. Individuals go out during the day to a day program or to supported employment, unless they can also retire. We now have people living in some of our residential settings into their 70s, which is considered an advanced age for a person with an intellectual disability in the range of severe and profound. In 1979, the name was changed to St. Joseph Center, trying to get away from the image of a children's hospital. We're still referred to by some people as the Children's Hospital. And the reason is that we serve people across the age continuum. And it's not merely a hospital for acute care. It's residential, and we have many community settings. In 1981, St. Joe's added adult day services as in the state of Pennsylvania, children with intellectual disabilities can receive schooling up until the age of 21. But like all of us, we don't stop learning at the age of 21. And so the day setting is for those who are not eligible for competitive employment, but who still have the desire to, be outside of their home, socialize with peers, with all of their healthcare and personal needs being met. In the last several years, our adult day program also really focuses on being engaged in the community. And so by small groups, they'll go out to the farmer's market, to neighborhood parks, to Marywood or the University of Scranton, to do activities that others might enjoy during the day. This photo was taken in 2004. And it just reminds me very much of that previous photo where I showed everyone on the front steps, which was probably taken in the 1940s. This somewhat shows, a 60-year difference in who we serve today. So although it's an older photo, this is the edition that was put on St. Joe's in the 1980s. It's a therapy center, and you can see that most of the people that we support in residential care at the main center utilize a wheelchair throughout the course of the day. And I just think this is a great before and after photo. In 1984, St. Joseph's Center was separate, a foundation was separately incorporated. That, of course, is the board that raises, holds, and distributes funds for the purpose of St. Joseph's. We do a few events through the foundation. We do some grant writing, an annual appeal, and other ways in which we, again, try to grow our reserves and continue to support the daily operations. While we did in the 1950s bring children with intellectual disabilities into residential care, the main center continued to be an orphanage, a place for the care of those with special needs, but also women who were experiencing pregnancies that were considered crisis pregnancies, not from a medical standpoint, but more from an emotional, social standpoint. So women who were pregnant and unmarried and maybe not intending to keep the child after birth would come and live here and place that child for adoption. It was in the 1980s that Sister Mary and Denise Walsh really felt that that mix of populations was unfair to the pregnant woman. She was now living basically among children who had special needs, children who were waiting to be placed for adoption, and that it lacked privacy for that woman and maybe compromised her mental health or her outlook. So she really pushed for a house to be acquired for women to still have a safe place to live, but just not at the main campus, which is a busy workplace. Today we have about 400 people who work here at the main center. We have 650 employees in total. So this upper right corner is the Walsh Manor. It's located in the hill section. The dedicated housing for women experiencing homelessness while pregnant originally moved to a building on campus. It moved to Carbondale to be adjacent to our St. Joseph's Hospital in Carbondale, and then ultimately moved to the hill section. So this is home to approximately 4 women who are experiencing homelessness during their pregnancy. During the time that they live there, the women are encouraged to establish goals around income, housing, and parenting, and they have 24-hour staff to work with them in addition to their case manager on achieving those goals. Women cannot live here because the home is very small. Women don't live here with their infant. I'll get into where they can transition. but we typically have 2 to 4 women there at any given time. In 1992, St. Joe's became part of the statewide adoption network. This was a creation of Governor Casey for the purpose of helping children in the foster care system whose parents would never be able to parent them to be able to be adopted, to be relinquished for adoption. And so it becomes part of our traditional infant adoption program dating back to the early 1900s. We continue to meet with birth mothers or birth parents who are considering placing their child for adoption. It's a very meaningful and important aspect of our ministry, and grateful for the ways that St. Joe's has been able to be part of a person's life and to help develop a family. In 1997, St. Joseph's expanded its therapy program to include an aquatic therapy program. We have a pool heated to 92 degrees that's open to the community, and all of our therapy services are. They include physical, recreational, music, speech, occupational, behavioral supports, and aquatic-based physical therapy. So the story continues. In 2000, this year, we're celebrating 25 years of the Dennis Cafferty Memorial Auction. Dennis and his wife Nancy were active volunteers. They actually met at the summer festival. Each was there with friends volunteering, and they met. So it was a great story. Dennis was the auctioneer at the first auction St. Joe's had, and unfortunately he passed away within a week. And so the auction has been named for Dennis, and I think it's also, to me, a great reminder of the impact that volunteers have had on creating many of the events that are so important to St. Joe's. The auxiliary was separately incorporated in 2003, but the auxiliary really, we believe the auxiliary members to be the founders of St. Joseph's, the first women who came together, and when the homes were acquired and the sisters became the staff, those group of women agreed to continue to fundraise for the benefit of St. Joe's, to advocate and volunteer. And we're grateful for all the ways in which the auxiliary and volunteers continue to have a great impact on the mission of St. Joseph's. In 2004, a long-held dream was realized when the Mother Infant Home opened. It's in South Scranton. It's a former convent, and so it's large. It has 5 one-bedroom apartments, and this is a woman, the picture is a woman who lived there. It is sort of a step toward greater independence, whereas Walsh Manor is shared living. Mother Infant really is more independent. Women are again working on personal goals of income, housing, and parenting, and preparing to transition to more stable housing. Last year, when we celebrated its 20th anniversary, we had recorded that 140 families, mothers with infant children, lived there at the start of their life as a family. In 2014, shortly after we celebrated our 125th anniversary, we opened Trinity Child Care Center. It's licensed by the Pennsylvania Department of Health as a prescribed pediatric extended care center, which really means it's a medical daycare. It's for children who have medical needs that require the care of nurses when they're not in the company of their parents who've been trained in their care. We opened a 30-child center in 2014 and moved to a larger facility in 2019. Today, it meets the needs of approximately 60 children each day. One of the requirements is that the parents have to work or be in school in order for the insurance to cover that. This past spring, we opened our first, or not our first, we opened our Child Learning Center, and we named it Blessings Children's Learning Center. I say it's not our first because in 1915, when we opened a day shelter in downtown Scranton on Linden Street, A day shelter was also a place where children could stay during the day, particularly if their mothers worked downtown in some of the hotels or restaurants, um, laundry facilities. So this is actually our second daycare 100 years later, but it's opened for the children of our staff. That's the goal, what's tied into our workforce initiatives to be able to recruit and retain dedicated staff. And later this year, we'll be opening, actually in a few weeks, we purchased a building near the main center, which will be our career center for workforce development. Our human resources offices will be staffed there, and we also will have a learning center for ongoing training and updating. As I mentioned, the story of St. Joseph's is very closely tied to the IHM congregation, and the relationship we use is that of sponsorship. So the definition of sponsorship is a structured relationship really marked with fidelity and some duties of governance, where the sponsor, in this case the IHM congregation, on behalf of the church, directs and influences a ministry that meets an apostolic need and furthers the mission of St. Joseph of Jesus. So in this case, through the work of St. Joseph's. So that relationship, as I said, it has fidelity to the mission of Jesus and also governance related. Members of the IHM congregation serve on our board. They minister within St. Joe's, and myself and all of my predecessors have been members of the congregation. So that concludes the remarks that I prepared for today. I might be a little short of the time frame, but I imagine I just wanted to mention my references. In addition to those people who just stopped me on the street to tell me about their experience of St. Joe's, whether they had a child who lived here for a short time, whether they placed a child for adoption, adopted someone, worked here, became a nurse because of the experience they had here. Just wonderful experiences and comments that have been shared with me. But the references I use, there's a document, my guess is she prepared it for her master's degree, but Sister Hilarion Sullivan in 1953, she was on staff here and she wrote a history of St. Joe's. And then, of course, our own Sister Michelle Keenan drafted a book that references the evolution of the congregation, the book I mentioned on the history of Greenridge, and our own 125th anniversary booklet.
Yeah, good. Sister Maryalice, thank you very much. That was excellent. I didn't realize myself how many satellites St. Joe's had beyond the center in Greenwich there. I will open it up to questions, but I have one first, so I'm going to start. I wondered, you shared some really great historic photos, other photos that I've seen of the center in the early days, even into like the 50s. They're all like tiny little kids. Is there or was there like an age limit to be included or to live at St. Joe's? Whether it was the story you shared about the mother was in the hospital and then the kids lived there for a time. Was there an age limit to the children that were taken in by St. Joe's?
So typically, when it was an orphanage, the children were younger. There was never a school here. There were, Catholic schools in the community. St. Paul's, St. Clair's is newer, so St. Paul's and St. Mary's. So if children were here until school age and not yet adopted, they might go to move to the orphanage at St. Patrick's. And also tied into our history was also Lordsmont and St. Michael's School for Boys. So sometimes the children, once they became school age, again, if not adopted and if not eligible for adoption, so that their parents didn't relinquish or the courts didn't relinquish parental rights, they might move on to another location. And there is time in the history, sometimes they lowered the age, like no one after age 3 could be admitted. Other times it was age 5, and that probably had to do with funding and space, all of those kinds of issues. Today, we don't have an age of admission or an age of discharge. the age of the onset of the intellectual disability has to be before the age of 18. That's how it's considered a developmental intellectual disability. And we don't discharge. So we have people at our main center where people are more medically fragile living into the ages of 50s and 60s. In our community homes, we have had people living into their 70s.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very
But I
good.
think people think children because even if their chronological age is longer, their intellectual disability sometimes is still infant or toddler.
Sure. Sure. Very good. Does anyone else have questions or stories to share? It's great that people have such fond memories of the center, and it's a part of so many people's lives. Beyond the potato pancakes at the festival in the summer. Um,
Yeah.
but if anyone else, I was muting people as we were going. So if you have questions or comments, please unmute yourself
Well,
and chime in.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, George, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more a comment because she did not know the railroad that was going to go by the mother house. Yeah, you'll laugh and you'll probably know it's the Laura line, which had a proposed line through Dunmore past the mother house and on up to Carbondale, and that never happened.
Because
Right.
So your question is answered. You can put a name to the railroad.
okay, and it didn't happen because the sisters didn't want it to happen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Our
Very
Lady
good. Thank you, George. Ella, do you
Thank
raise
you.
your hand?
Yeah, thank you, Sister Maryalice. I dropped in today because I don't know that much about St. Joseph Center, and it's indeed a marvelously complex organization. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, we're larger than people realize.
Mhm.
We have we're probably in about 30 locations with our community homes, our two residents. We have 3-day programs here in Dunmore and Pittston, and we have 650 employees. And Bill Lawrence, who's there on the treadmill or something elliptical, is a former employee.
So I assume you have a complex staffing pyramid also in order to oversee the group homes and oversee the different activities, because you can't do that.
No, I can't do that. Yes, we have an administrative team, myself and 5 others, and then we have about 25 department directors, who have different functions within them. The work is very challenging, and I think everyone knows today it's very hard to find really dedicated employees who want to be at work. There's lots of options for work from home and that sort of thing. So to find people who want to really do direct care during the pandemic, we were very challenged to find staff who wanted to do. Well, many staff retired at that time for various health reasons. So it was very hard to find direct care. But, gratefully, we find people who have compassion and who make it their life mission. Wednesday night, we had our years of service dinner. So we have an LPN who's been with us for 40 years, given years of service to pins to people with 50 and 55 years of service, including in direct care and nursing. So grateful for that kind of dedication. And most people say I just get attached to the residents and want to see how they grow up and see what next challenge they're going to meet. So we are fortunate, but it's not easy work for sure.
What's your turnover rate amongst the staff?
Turnover is something we're always working on. We can depend on the program site. It could be 0. So at our Trinity, where nurses who are used to working in the hospitals are now in a day setting Monday through Friday. That program has 0. In residential, where people have to work holidays and weekends, it could be as high as 40%.
That is high.
Our industry is around 25%. So in some of our programs were less, a few programs were higher. But we've done a lot to invest in the workforce. We created our own internal career ladder. Our most common direct care position is called direct support professional. and it's yet to be recognized by the Bureau of Labor. That's been advocacy legislation we've been advocating for 10 years at least, and it never makes it into the Bureau of Labor, which means it can't get studied. It doesn't get compared. There's no level credentialing, but we created our own career ladder. We were the first in the area to do that, and we've had more than 40 staff who've, through online learning and through demonstration of learning, have earned different levels of certification with a national credential.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Anyone else? Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
Oh, there.
There we go.
Um,
Hello.
This doesn't apply directly to St. Joe's, but it's something that I've always been curious about. Is there such a thing as an orphanage anymore?
That's actually a really good question. I don't know.
No, not in the state of Pennsylvania, and really very rare in the United States. So and I think the timing was very interesting when we were asked to begin to care for children with disabilities was around the time that the United States was beginning to use foster care in lieu of orphanages. And there are residential treatment facilities for children, but those often are children with, a behavioral need. So a true orphanage, however, because our history was orphanage,
Can't do anymore.
and for a long time in the yellow books, we were listed as, yellow pages as an orphanage. When we first got a Facebook page, it would always show up as orphanage. So finally, I think it says nonprofit organization, which is preferred. So we are not. We once had somebody knock on the door. It wasn't the best experience we've ever had. A man brought his daughter and threatened to leave her here and for disciplinary reasons. Not a good thing at all. But he was trying to make a point with her. But orphanages are not, to my knowledge, are not really commonly used in the United States.
No longer a thing anymore. Okay. Very good. Thank you. And Deborah, did you have a question? I saw your hand. Yeah.
I'll quickly share my story. I was actually born at St. Joseph's. When I was in, when I was in high school, my mother, I'm the youngest of 4 children. When I was in high school, my mother shared her story that, when I was born, my father had come back from World War II. He was on Normandy and Anzio. She was a registered nurse. She was taking care of her mother with breast cancer. She was caring for 3 children already, so she thought she would put me up for adoption. She had a family. I guess the family was already selected because back in 1958, that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And after I was born, she couldn't do it. She couldn't go through with it. So she brought me home, and for I don't know how long, the story goes, that she put me in a drawer of a dresser drawer because she had no provisions for me because she didn't plan on keeping me. And it wasn't until years later when I was an adult that I actually looked on my birth certificate and it says born at St. Joseph's Hospital. So I'm very touched by St. Joseph's. I've been out of the area. I worked for FEMA, so I've been out of the area for a long time, but I really appreciate everything that St. Joseph's does for the children in the community.
Thank
And
you.
I just thought I'd share that real quickly.
I appreciate you saying that.
Very good.
Yeah, there were
Thank you for
times
sharing that.
the hospital was staffed with OB physicians, and there were times when the Scranton hospitals had no capacity, and so there were children who were born here, whose parents intended to keep them. But it's also great for you to share that story because there's also this myth that the sisters kept the children. They deemed mothers unworthy and they would keep the children, and there's nothing written in our history that indicates that that was a practice here. So that I think even today, our director of maternity, Linda knows her well, Tamara Hall. Linda volunteers in our baby and children's pantry, which is also a part of our maternity program, which meets the needs of families throughout our community and beyond. she meets with mothers when they're pregnant who are considering adoption, and with you know, an unbiased outcome. You know, she's not directing them to adoption. She's helping them to make a good decision. You know, to maybe the decision is to place for adoption, and maybe the decision is to raise the child and to know better what the supports are around them. I think that's important. You know, sometimes they come in not knowing that they can, you know, apply for different funding for their child or get different types of support in the community. But thank you for sharing that.
Thanks again for joining us today, Sister Maryalice. I mean, I know you have a lot on your plate, so thanks very much for taking time out of your day to talk to us about St. Joe's. Our next episode of Lackawanna Past Times will be October 24th. We're doing it a little bit earlier because of Halloween. We are keeping to a Halloween theme. We'll be joined by Bill Saturday, who runs a true crime blog, who'll be talking about the case of Dominic Delfino in 1918, who escaped from the Lackawanna County Jail after being convicted of a murder in Archbold. So we'll be talking about Dominic Delfino and the Great Escape, which launched an international manhunt to find him again in the 19 teens. So join us for that. We'll have a good time talking about a wild story from Scranton's early days. So again, everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.